I totally said, is this thing on? What's going on? Yeah. Well, hello, everybody. It's Deb and Heather. And we're on kind of like episode 2 of the Skeptic and the Mystic, episode 30 of our podcast. This is our little show where we talk about all of those things that seem a little bit unbelievable sometimes, but they're deeply rooted in spiritual practices, also some science. And we love to dive into why they can actually help your life be better. So we'll approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism and also some mysticism.
And I think it's funny you said, a small dose of science. I mean, I think everything is science, but I think even going into science with skepticism, which most people aren't anymore, they're just like, oh, it's science. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? Science once said that you should spray DDT on your kids to keep flies off of them. And science once said that pregnant women should smoke cigarettes. Like everything, I think, should be like, we should question everything. Like,
well, true scientific method would, I guess.
Right, exactly. That's the point, right? Is that true science does ask questions and have conversation, and like that's what this is about. It's like it's okay to question things.
Yes.
And like a lot of times people just be like, oh, well, you're anti this or anti that. It's like, well, no, just because I want to ask questions doesn't mean I'm an anti anything. I just ask questions.
Ask questions, right. Yeah. And we can all arrive at different conclusions and all be right at the same time. Right.
So one of the things that Deb and I started to talk about, and I was like, I want to talk about this like when we go live, is this app that she told me about on our last episode called Stardust. And it is a period tracking app. So men, you don't need this, but you might want to have it if you have a woman in your life to track theirs.
For real. Yes. Do you know what's funny? A few years ago, I wanted to develop an app that was like, it would track your cycle and then you could share it with a partner. And I just realized that the app I was using prior to Stardust has a share with partner feature now.
Oh, very nice.
It's kind of smart. You have to tread lightly as a man, if you're going to ask your female partner if she's on her period. But if you had an app that just told you and you could answer that question, or if she's PMSing, and then You're like, oh, okay, I get it. Because, let's face it, it does affect how you interact.
Well, and so yesterday, one of my friends called. I'm friends with his husband and wife, and the husband called to see how I was doing because there was some stuff going on in my life, and they knew, like, I talked to the wife earlier. And I said to him, I was like, I have my period. I just got my period today. So I'm like, everything's accentuated. And he's like when we first met, we were at this Dr. Joe Dispenza conference together, and we were on the same team, and we just like clicked. And he's like, it's like, you're like a little sister. And I'm like, yeah, like I'm like, we just had that connection. So he's like, you're kind of like a little sister when you, like 30 seconds into the conversation, you say to me like, well, I'm on my period. I'm like, I will say that to anybody. Like I've never been the girl who's like, well, I can't talk about that. Because everybody knows that that's what women go through. And it makes sense to me to be like, hey, just know that I'm in a really sensitive spot right now. Yeah. And you're going to be gentle with me, right? And so what I wanted to talk about on this app was when, after Deb told me about it, I downloaded it, and put in my information. And as soon as I put in my information, it said, you're a red witch. And I was like, what the heck is that? And because it said my moon's like my cycle falls within the moons. Now I don't always get it on the full moon, but I guess it falls within it. And so Deb started to explain to me, because I don't understand what this means at all.
Yeah, no. So the theory is, and obviously I don't know. I mean, I don't know the full history of it. I just was starting to share before we got on the air that I was aware of this before I downloaded this app, but because it's more common for some reason. I don't know the explanation for this, but it's more common for women to cycle on the new moon, which is the opposite of the full moon. But there's some women will cycle on the full moon, which mine is usually around there as well. And so same thing, like that means you're a red witch, which I don't know if everybody calls it a red witch, but those who cycle during the full moon, because they are the ones that are then ovulating during the new moon when more people are cycling. So you would be, when more people are in need, you're the one that's at the peak of your energy. So when we're ovulating as, female menstruating women, we tend to be just a little more high energy at that time. We're kind of like running on all cylinders. So then we are then able to assist and be the ones that are healing when there's more need for that. So people that are called red witches tend to commonly be more of, looked at as like a healer type. Your archetype might be more like healer. So I don't know for you, what I found interesting is how many different ways I have had that message come to me from Akashic Records readings, from different readings of astrology, just a million different ways I've been told that I'm supposed to be a healer, teacher in that sort of role. So it was super interesting when I knew of that, didn't think much of it, downloaded that app, and then I was like, like how many different ways can I be told that I need to be fully embracing this path? But yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's cool,
Yeah, and I think about it, I definitely have had so many times like things that have said like you're a help, not only like a helper heal. I don't like the word healer because I think everybody is their own healer. It's just giving people the tools to do it. But I think that there's some people that are just more naturally suited for that, and that's like what I've been told. So I was like, oh, okay. And here it even confirms it, whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's obviously dates back to times when we didn't force women to pretend that menstruation was not a thing we go through, right? Like, I think that right. Yeah, I think in tribal cultures, like they kind of separate themselves from the tribe during that time. So
the big, I think that we should do that totally.
we live in a capitalistic patriarchal society where we have to just soldier on, like nothing's going on, which we've all gotten very used to. This is a whole different topic where we weren't planning to go. But, as the mother of a girl, it's interesting because I've heard myself say to her sometimes, like, suck it up. You have to go to school today. Like that's not an excuse to skip school. And then, I don't know what is the right thing to do, because we do live in a society where we aren't allowed to just go to the red tent for 5 days. Yeah.
Well, it definitely does in many ways lead into the topic of boundaries that we're going to be talking about. And this is, as Deb said, a continuation. We had started this conversation about 4 or 5 episodes ago, and we got sidetracked on a bunch of different things, and it's totally fine because right? You can go back and listen. But boundaries is a huge thing. And every conversation that I have with clients, boundaries comes up. It doesn't matter what level that somebody is at, that boundaries is one of the biggest things. It's when somebody doesn't have solid boundaries, right? Their life is impacted in financially, in time, in their emotional energy, in every single way, right? So we covered all the different ways that boundaries impact, or not having boundaries impact your life. But to just review what the different types of boundaries are. And there are lots of different types of boundaries. These are just 4 specific ones that make it really easy to understand, have a framework for boundaries. So we have soft boundaries, and a person with soft boundaries tends to merge with other people's boundaries. Like they don't have a clear sense of their own boundaries, so they can be easily manipulated. You see this a lot with peer pressure, with teens. With rigid boundaries, that's like the extreme where somebody is totally closed off, walled off, and they both physically or emotionally, and they tend to everything is just no, they don't have any leeway for anything at all. Typically somebody with a rigid boundary is because they've had a traumatic experience, and the only way that they know how to protect themselves is just to be nope, and to shut everything down. Right? And rigid boundaries can be really appropriate in some situations, and they're not always helpful. So then we have spongy boundaries, and the spongy boundaries is a combination of soft and rigid. So this is somebody who they're inconsistent in how they behave, right? And they don't know what they want to let in and out, and so they might say yes to one thing one day, and then say no to the same thing the next day, and it's wait a minute, it's very confusing, right? And then we have flexible boundaries, and flexible boundaries is someone who they can decide like what to let in and what to keep out, and they can be resistant to emotional pressure and manipulation. And they're difficult. People with flexible boundaries or rigid are difficult to exploit, right? Because they have a very strong sense about who they are and what they want, and that's where we want our boundaries to be. They want our boundaries to be within a flexible range, right? And flexible boundaries are great because they foster. Well, I would say that you have great self-esteem when you have flexible boundaries, because you're clear about who you are and you're not looking at everything else to guide you. And we know, like in high school and growing up, kids, their boundaries are fluid and they're changing and they're trying to figure themselves out. But when somebody gets to be an adult and their boundaries are still like always changing stuff, that can be a challenge. That can be a really big challenge. Okay? So boundaries we see impact in our relationships, right? When you say yes to things that you want to say no to, right? When you don't allow your time to be valued, when you don't allow your personal, like, physical, sexual boundaries, like those kind of things. Like if you don't have strong boundaries, they're going to be impacted in that way. So we wanted to talk about three things like three simple steps to set effective boundaries. So this is where, for a lot of people, the first one, they're very simple, and they can be very easy, but they're not always, right? So the first step I'll go over the steps and then we'll go back through them. The first step is just to eliminate any excuses of why you have boundaries, right? And then respect your value, respect who you are. And I think that's the biggest one for most people of why they don't have strong boundaries. And then the third one is to honor your strengths. Those, they're simple, but they're not always easy for people. Okay?
Yeah.
So the first thing, you want to eliminate excuses. And not only in your listening to yourself, but when you're listening to other people, the way that you can tell something is an excuse is if you hear them use words like, yes, but I can't because, well, but if I do, then like I could if, like, and I don't know what else to do. Right? Those are all signs that you or some other person is making an excuse. And excuses always transfer responsibility and empowerment from the person who's speaking. Once you've given anything outside of you control, that becomes an excuse. Which is, Deb and I talk about all the time. What's your one thing that you love to talk about all the time, Deb?
Personal responsibility.
Yep. Yeah. Taking personal responsibility. Like the reason why people don't honor your boundaries is because you give excuses all the time for them and allow them to not honor your boundaries. It's that simple. It's not always easy to hear.
Yeah. No, I just think people might need some examples, right? I mean, what this brings up for me personally, which I've definitely worked on, and I, don't always do, but when I can tell when I don't want to do something, if I immediately feel like if I think about saying yes to that and I feel frustrated or bitter, then it's not something that aligns with and it's just not aligning with my energy. So the giving excuses, this kind of falls into, and this I think does fall into the boundaries conversation, is the people pleasing thing, which I think we talked about a little bit, I don't know, recently. Because when someone asks me to do something that I'm not available for, or simply don't want to, I have learned to resist the urge to give a whole lot of reasons why, instead of just, I'm not available to do that. Mm-hmm. Would that be an example that you could give people? Like what else, how else would you see that manifest for people?
I'm gonna put this on, for eliminating excuses, mm-hmm. Like how to eliminate an excuse. So I need like specific examples, like.
So let's make up a scenario. I think people often have trouble with boundaries with family, right? Mm-hmm. Your sibling that lives nearby wants to ask you to watch their children Okay, I'm just making something up. I have no idea. But they have small children. They're constantly taking advantage of your time, wants you to babysit their kids and put your plans aside because they want to do something else. This is just definitely an arbitrary excuse. But what would you say, I'm sorry, an arbitrary example, but what would you say would be an example of someone who has poor boundaries responding to that request?
Oh, if they had poor boundaries and they would respond, they would say yes, and then they'd be pissed off at themselves for saying yes.
And then what if they say no with excuses?
Right. And if they said without excuses, they would just say, oh, I'm not available then. Right. I mean, it's really that simple. But
it's not that simple for people, right? Especially when you're talking about it's your older sister and there's all this history and all these reasons why you feel like you can't say no.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's this really great episode with Byron Katie, who wrote the book Loving What Is, and Oprah. And they were talking about, so Byron Katie has this really great process called the work. And it's basically asking 4 questions and doing a turnaround. And the 4 questions, so it's something like, if you're mad at somebody, and you're like, well, John shouldn't have lied to me. And so the first question you ask is it true that he shouldn't have lied to you? And, you go through and you say, well, for when you're really pissed off, you're like, well, yeah, it's totally true. But then you say like, well, no, it's not absolutely true that he shouldn't have lied to me. And then the next question is like, who do you become when you believe the thought that he shouldn't have lied to you? And so you just start getting clear on like who you become when you're believing that lie. And then it's who would you be if you didn't believe that? And then the last part of the turnaround is like turning around, like, I shouldn't have lied to me, or John should have lied to me. But Byron Katie is going through this with Oprah. And what I loved about it so much is Oprah was talking about how family members would come and ask her for money all the time. Mm-hmm. And Byron Katie was saying, she was just like, they were essentially role playing. And Byron Katie said that when, people would come to her for money or whatever, she would just say, oh, no, I can't. And Oprah's like, that's it? Like, that's all you say? And she's like, yeah, that's all you say. And Oprah was so frustrated because she had such a hard time setting that boundary.
Right.
She was just like, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And I don't even think it was like, I'm sorry, because then that still like will give a thing. But it was like, oh no, I'm not available for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is that simple, but I know that it is that simple, but it's also for a lot of people, it's not that simple because particularly, say you are Oprah and you have more than enough resources to help a lot of people. So that expectation is there. And somebody asks you for what's probably pocket change to Oprah and she says no, there's fallout beyond that. So you know what I'm saying? Like I think for some people, it's not that simple to just say, no, I'm not going to give you money, even though I have it. No, I'm not going to watch your children, even though I could. Yeah. So how do
no, I don't want to do that. Right. Okay. So then that's where we go into the next 2. So the second one is like respecting your value, right? And these next 2, respecting your value and honoring, your strengths, this is where the I'm going to use the term, Deb, because I don't know any other term, but like we got to figure that part out. But like where this like woo-woo type stuff comes in, where people like it's having that solid sense of self, right? That really comes from being connected to yourself, who you are, your values, and your beliefs. Right?
Yeah.
When we are not connected to those, right? And that's all from trauma that we've experienced, from having heart walls, from having unhealed wounds, all of those things disconnect ourselves from ourselves, which allows us to like, if I say yes to them, then maybe I'll get some like affirmation and connection. Or if I say yes to this, right, this is where I get my identity. And so it's once we can be certain in who we are, right, and really grounded in that, that's respecting your value.
Yeah. Okay? I think something for me personally that maybe will resonate with some other people is even, yes, the connection to yourself, but sometimes when that feels challenging, when that self-love feels challenging and you're looking for it, from family members for whatever. If you believe in a higher being, God, whatever your version of spirit is, focusing that connection there if you aren't able to find the self piece, because it kind of replaces that external need that I think sometimes people are looking for. When I want my sister to still like me, if I say no, she's not going to like me. That it's God and your higher self are one and the same. It's, kind of however you want to believe it. But I think for some people, it might be easier to see it as spirit, God, universe, whatever your higher power is, which translates to yourself. But it's a little nuanced. But I think for some people that might be a little bit easier to grasp when you're challenged with this practice.
And you brought up something that I don't even know if you realize that you did, is that what you did is ask, like, okay, if I say no to my sister, right, what am I afraid of?
Right.
Because, and for most people, I will say this, most people are afraid of being rejected. They're afraid of being not liked. They're afraid of not being approved of. They're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of losing love. They're afraid of having nothing, or they're afraid of uncertainty. And so when you can get really clear of what it is that you're afraid of, it's going to be different. Some people are like, I don't care if they reject me, but I don't want them to judge me,
right.
Or I don't want to lose their love, or it's all going to come back to that thing, that you're afraid, there's something you're afraid that if this happens, right, then I won't be able to live, survive, whatever. If they reject me, right, then he always comes squeaky toys whenever.
Also, I know, I hear that, but I think that's also a nice circle back to practicing the work. Because is that true? Or is it true that you will never be loved again if you say no to this request?
Right.
Oh, what? Probably not true. Yeah.
And so when you can go, be connected to the value that you have, and be a, what's the word I'm looking for? The word is right there. I have period brain, so that's my excuse. Like being autonomous individual, knowing that your value and worth comes just from you being you, not from anyone else accepting you or anything else. Right? When you can stand solid in that. And like you said, that is hard for people because we've been raised to believe that all of our worth and value comes from everything outside of us, what we're wearing, who we're friends with, what our job is, what our car is, whether, there's so many things I could talk about today, but I'm not going to.
Well, that's going to be different for everybody, but for sure, chances are, if you are watching this and, have access to us on a computer or something like that, you've been raised in a society where that's most likely been taught to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to respect your value. And, one of the biggest things that allows people, that I've seen in my work with people, that allows them to respect their value is getting rid of their heart wall. That is hands down. If there's no work that I do with someone outside of heart wall work, that is, we've done really good. We've done really, really good. I was working with a woman the other day. I always do an assessment before we work on their heart wall, and assessment after. I have them rate statements or rank statements, and all these statements. I'm going to pull it up because it was just crazy, how many things. And this goes back to value and worth and what the heart wall does. So some of the statements, and I have them rate them on a scale of 0 to 10, 0, I don't believe it, 10, I absolutely believe it. So these statements are more in a negative term, but, I feel guilt about who I am. She had a 9 before we worked on her heart wall. I feel emotionally numb, was a 10. I feel stuck and I don't know why, was a 10. I fear feeling all of my emotions, 10. I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, I'm not lovable. Those were all 10s. Okay?
Wow.
Yeah. And after we did the heart wall, every single one of those went down to 1s.
How many sessions did it take you to clear her heart wall?
We worked on, let me go through. I don't number them, so I have to count.
I'm just curious because, Yeah, I've done that too. I've not had anybody where I'm starting at like level 10 on, I mean, my questions might be slightly different than yours, but I've not had anyone starting at like such a high level of need.
Yeah.
You know?
It was 8 sessions to clear her heart wall.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? And
Which doesn't always, I don't know if that correlates or not. But.
No, because some people who have had less, and some people can't even or have a hard time being honest with themselves. And I've had some people, when we go back and do the assessment, they're like, I wasn't as honest as I could have been with the numbers beforehand.
Yeah.
Now that I, see stuff.
Yeah.
But that heart wall really allows you, and this flows into the third thing of honoring your strengths. What the heart wall does is it stops you from seeing your value and your worth and your strengths. And when you can honor them, it's like say you're a really good soccer player and somebody wants to draft you as a field hockey player, and they're like, we'd love to have you on your team. Well, you just want to be liked and loved. So you're like, okay, but you suck at field hockey and you're really great at soccer.
Right.
When you're grounded and certain in yourself, you're like, hey, I can't play field hockey. I'm going to play, I need to be playing soccer. And even though things don't seem like it's going, like I'm having doors open for me right now, I know that this is where my strength is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue to move forward in that.
Yeah. For anybody that maybe doesn't know what a heart wall is, it does relate to what we were talking about where you're programming, but that, that is like your buildup of trapped emotions, which typically, some of those will come from your upbringing and all of those things that created this need for pleasing your sister, your family, your boss, whatever. It's all tied together. But that heart wall, I don't know. I think we just kind of started talking about it like everybody knows what it is, but that is the buildup of like basically your life until this point, kind of literally building a wall around your heart. I mean, not one that you can necessarily see, but blocks that electromagnetic field. Yeah.
Yeah. And majority of people have these heart walls. And it's funny because when I talk to people and I just start talking and I barely even explain it, and people are like, oh yeah, I totally have one of those.
Yeah.
People are like, I've never heard that term before, but that makes total sense. Like if you feel like you have a heaviness on your chest, if you feel like there's something like blocking between you and somebody else, like you just can't seem to connect, with people, it's a heart wall. There's a wall around your heart. And I always tell people, if you imagine somebody who is in the military and they're, in high battle zones and they come back and they're still wearing their military terms are, I'm not good at this, right? But they're still wearing war zone stuff while they're walking around as a civilian, right? Their interactions with people are going to be completely different than if they're walking around in civilian clothes. Like if they have all their armor off, it's going to be totally different.
Yeah.
And so a heart wall does just blocks you, right? And the funny thing is even though it's protecting you from the world, it also disconnects you from yourself. And so people really, okay, so here's a perfect example. I'm pausing myself, but I may have said this before, I think, but I'll say it again. I had this woman who we worked on her heart wall and she had just gotten out of her second physically abusive relationship. And obviously she was always letting people just, disrespect her. And so we had worked on her heart wall and we had a follow-up conversation. And she's like, I don't know, Heather. She's like, I think I have a even bigger heart wall now. And I'm like, what do you mean? Tell me what's going on. And she's like, well, I started dating this guy and he started talking to me like this and doing this stuff. And I was like, oh no, I'm sorry. That's not going to work for me. And then some stuff was happening at work. And she's like, no, that's not right. And I'm not going to put up with that. And I said to her, I was like, do you think that you have another heart wall, or do you think that you're putting up boundaries for yourself now and telling people how to treat you? And she was like, that's what this is.
Right.
And I was like, yes, exactly. Right. Because now she had a self-respect and concern for herself. And so that's what the value of what a heart wall, releasing a heart wall can do.
Right. And I would love to say no shame in a heart wall. And even if you don't feel it, pretty sure you probably have built one. It's just part of the human experience. We are domesticated as children. There's always wounding that happens. Always. I mean, you would be a true anomaly if you could get through childhood and get into adulthood without any sort of scarring whatsoever.
Right.
So most of us have something, some amount of buildup, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if boundaries is something that's really challenging for you, like there's more than likely some trauma and some unhealed wounds that haven't been worked through. You're not a victim, to being somebody who's just going to be walked all over the rest of your life. Right? There's conscious level tools to learn along with releasing the subconscious stuff. Whether it's heart walls, whether it's working on releasing literally the energetic charge of the trauma that you've experienced. There is so much that can be done. If boundaries has been something that like you struggled with a ton, totally get it. Like I've been there so much, all of my high school years, my college years. Oh gosh, like I've definitely been there. I totally get it. And the more work that I do on myself and in myself, the less crap that I'm willing to tolerate because nope, don't have time for
This is
that.
actually freeing. It may feel terrifying to say I'm going to put up boundaries and risk losing some of these damaging relationships, but they also, number one, you don't even know that those people are going to abandon you if you start to devalue yourself like we were talking about. But also, if that is the consequence, there's still some gains to be had from breaking yourself free from relationships that continually damage your own self-esteem.
Yeah. It hurts at first, and then you're like, oh gosh, this feels really good.
And you open yourself up for some healthier relationships. You clear space, literally clear space. Yeah.
So I'm going to put this up, both, Deb, well, I can't even talk today. This is, if you want to with me, I have a course that I work with people where we work on clearing the heart wall, and you get a course that has conscious level tools to be able to work through stuff. This is a code so that you can get $100 off. Write that down, and then we can just shoot me a message and we can set up a time to talk to see if this is something that you might want to do. And reach out to Deb. You're working with people on Heartwell stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And, there is some pricing on my website, but I would always do sliding scale if there, I want this to be accessible to people. So if money is the only thing holding you back from doing some of this work, message me, we'll find a way. Yeah. I want people to be able to, the money is not always the reason I do these things. So.
Well, I will, just on that conversation of boundaries too, right? Is like, I have learned, right, in working with people that when somebody doesn't have an energetic exchange of money, 9.9 times out of 10, like nothing changes.
No, well, hey, there's still the energetic exchange. Maybe it's not money. Maybe I find some other way for you to invest in yourself. But, like I said, we have a conversation. I would find out if you are willing to put your energy toward it as much as I'm going to put energy toward helping you.
Right.
Yeah.
So let us know what your thoughts are on boundaries. Are they hard for you? Are they easy for you? Do you feel like you have a heart wall? We want to hear from you, and let us know if there's anything that you would love to hear us talk about, so that we can help you live a happier, healthier life, because we all need it. We all need that these days. That's for sure.
We do. Yeah.
So have fun setting boundaries, eliminating excuses, respecting your value, and honoring your strengths so that you can have a happy life because you have healthy boundaries. We will talk to you later. Bye.